I'm Jim Updegraff. This is my studio. Come on in. As I said, this is my studio. Studio seems a little fancy for this. It's in fact a workshop. We built this about 3 years ago. Before this, I'd been working out of a genuine 20th century, early 20th century schoolhouse that's out in the front yard. We just ran out of space. Plus the place was impossible to heat in the winter. And as you know, winter lasts about 5 months up here. So this became feasible and we built it. There is a second floor for storage, and down here is a work area. And then we've got some cast-off furniture for a semi-social area. In terms of my background, in the early 1960s, I was an art major at the University of Iowa. Emphasis in printmaking, in intaglio etching. It took about 3 years for me to figure out that, one, I was not going to be a museum curator, which is one of the things you could do with that major. And two, I didn't want to teach. And three, I was not going to make a living as a painter or as a printmaker. So I found something else to do for a living and went to law school. I've been in practice here in West Union for almost 50 years now. I came here after spending 5 years as a Judge Advocate General's officer in the Army. And pretty well quit painting in 1964. And then started again when the children left home around 1998. And have been painting ever since then. This is essentially weekends and evenings because I still have my day job. The stuff on the easels is all work in progress, in various states of progress. The piece on the far left is more or less a view of the hill at El Dorado, viewed from the north. The sort of green and blue thing in the middle is a view of the bend in the Mississippi at Lansing, Iowa. And the big piece that I was just started a couple days ago is more or less my wife's grandmother and her chicken house down in northwest Missouri. I do not show in any galleries. The studio tour is essentially the only opportunity I have to show my stuff to the public. I do have some pieces hanging in various businesses around the area, but nothing very serious. I work almost entirely in oil. Oil paint is just a medium I seem to get along with. It can be a pain simply because oil paint doesn't dry the way, say, acrylic does. If you lay down a slab of acrylic paint, you can be pretty sure it is as dry as it's ever going to be in about 15 minutes. And you can work over it without any particular difficulties. Oil paint, on the other hand, does not dry. It cures. The oil that carries the pigment oxidizes on exposure to air. And depending on how thick or how thin you're working, it can take from a day or two or to 6 months or a year before the paint is completely cured. Once cured, it really should be varnished just to protect the surface. It's hard to hurt an oil painting. You know, it's, after all, it's canvas, the same sort of stuff you make tents out of, and the same sort of paint you put on barns. So it's pretty tough stuff. But nonetheless, it will accumulate dirt and dust, and if you smoke in the house, it accumulates nicotine particles and tends to turn yellow. So a coat of varnish helps preserve the paint and gives you a surface you can wash if you need to, or at least dust. This was just completed a couple weeks ago. It hasn't dried up completely yet, but it is 48 inches by 36 inches, which is about as big as I work. And it's for sale. And I suppose I'd be asking about $1,200 for that. This represents about a 50-year collection of brushes. Some of them haven't been touched for years. Some of them haven't been touched since 1964. But no matter what's going on, someplace in here is just the perfect brush for what I want to do. For instance, that puppy is probably just about ideal for big foliage. A wide swath of woodland like what's probably going to happen through the middle of this Lansing painting. But when the time comes, I'll go searching through here and we'll see what we can find. You never throw a brush away unless you've broken it. And I've broken a fair number. There are the brushes. Here's the paint. Again, some of these tubes are 50 years old and some are less than a month old. This poor thing, can't even make out what color it is. I'm sure is one I had when I was in undergraduate school. But it's still soft and it's still pliable, and the cap still comes off, and it is rose madder, which can be a handy color. I told you that the paintings that are up on the easels are in progress, but they're in various states of progress. The landscape on the far left is, I think, essentially done. I'm going to meditate on that one for a little bit, but I think it's pretty close to finished. I may do a little more detail work on that hillside to the rear. Also, this dark painting is another flight of fancy. During General Custer's centennial campaign of 1776, the night before the 7th Cavalry Regiment passed from the Rosebud Valley up over the divide and into the valley of the Little Bighorn River, General Custer had himself an officer's call and assembled all the officers of the regiment after dark and told them what he planned to do. They marched again at midnight, and within 18 hours, probably half the guys shown in that painting were dead. But it's sort of fun to mess with. It's an effect that you don't often have the chance to deal with. A little campfire scene. The green and blue painting is, well, it's hard to say halfway done, but it's getting there. I've laid in most of my colors. I've laid in most of the shapes, but it still has a long way to go. It is an impression of the Mississippi River over at Lansing, and here you see that awful mesh bottom bridge across the river. The one that scares the daylights out of me every time you go across it, because you can see right through it. The piece on the bottom is a scene in a barracks at Camp Funkston, Fort Riley, from maybe 1964 just a bunch of soldiers standing around in their free time at night. And as the habit of soldiers, all of them sitting around in their underwear polishing boots. This other bigger piece, again, about 48 by 36, is another shot at my wife's grandmother and her chicken house. And this was started maybe a week ago. It's got a long ways to go. I've pretty well laid in most of the shapes and have, I'm starting to figure out some of the line detail. But it has got a long way to go. I can figure that a small painting, depending on how complicated it gets, is going to take probably 3 or 4 days of actual work. But that spreads out over several weeks because you've got to stand back and let the paint dry before you can carry on. This one, for instance, I quit just because it got to the point that everything was too wet to mess with. It's pretty good shape right now. And this coming weekend, I may do a little more work on that. One thing I have to worry about is the colors on the river. I've just used ultramarine violet thin with white so far, and that's not working right. So I'll have to incorporate a little bit of some sort of red in there, maybe a little more blue, but we'll get there. When this big one is done, there will be a batch of chickens in this area, and then I've got to worry about working in some sort of a small landscape along that horizon line. The big henhouse picture, I will really, take some photographs of as the process goes along, and the studio tour will have that available. I hope it's from this stage through completion, but there may be some time constraints that stop that. In any event, I want to thank you for taking a look at this. I do appreciate your taking the time to see what I've got here and what my operation looks like. Thank you very much.